So more now on our top story. That number of confirmed cases of coronavirus here in the UK has now risen by 4 to 40 in total. The Prime Minister says we do need to be prepared for the virus to spread further across the UK. So if you've had to self-isolate, where do you stand with your workplace? Will you still get paid? And are employers obliged to allow you time off? Well, to try and answer some of those questions, I'm joined now by Kevin Poulter, who's an employment lawyer and a partner at the London law firm Freeths. Thank you very much, Kevin, for being with us.
Pleasure.
I know you've had lots of questions from people, not just our viewers, but clients and so on. I mean, I suppose the most common thing is if you do have to self-isolate after maybe a trip to Italy or something like that, either your own decision or you've been told to do that. I mean, can you get sort of sick pay if you don't have a doctor's note? How does that work?
It's a real challenge for employers particularly, but for employees who are worried about where the money's going to come from if they're sent home or told to stay away from work, it's a real issue. And as it stands, sick pay by its definition is when you're sick. If you're self-isolating, you may not yet be showing symptoms and therefore you wouldn't be classed as being sick. So it does depend on the individual employer, who may have best practice guidelines or even something in the contract that says if you are forced to stay away from work, then you may get paid. But otherwise, unless the government steps in and makes some decisions around this, the chances are you might not be getting paid. But
actually, you know, for the good of the country, really, the employer should be paying people for that, because we actually want to encourage people to self-isolate, don't we?
Absolutely, and I'm sure that well, for some businesses will be doing that. And for those people who can work from home, for example, then it's much easier to do. But if you're expected to go into work, then that's a much more difficult decision. And if the workplace closes down, for example, you're not able to carry out your work, perhaps. So in that situation, you're not providing the services. If you're forced to stay away from home or suspended by your employer, then you would typically be paid, but it does depend on their contract individually and or the policies in place. So it's always worth taking that time to check.
There's also a question, I suppose, with things like schools. You know, we might get more school closures if this outbreak gets worse, as the Prime Minister was indicating, and that means that people would then have to maybe look after their kids at home, so they can't go into work. What happens then? Yeah, well, the government allows, or the law allows, certain time off for dependent care, and for that example, school absences would certainly count. The right is to get no pay, just to have the time to be taken off. So what I would say to people is, if you can make other arrangements, do that, make yourself available for work. Otherwise, again, due to the policy or due to the law as it stands, you might not be being paid. Check with your employer, and I'm sure, as you say, that employers will be encouraged, businesses will be encouraged to do the right thing for the good of the country, but we've still got to remember this is a very small number of cases at the moment, and people shouldn't necessarily be refusing to attend work unless there's a good reason not to do so. Indeed, indeed, indeed. So it's a bit tricky in terms of people who are employed, who are on staff and so on. Even trickier, I guess, if you're a freelance, you know, and you're not actually tied to any company at all. You just work for a number of different companies or work for yourself.
Yeah, and typically, it depends on the contract, as I keep saying, but it depends on what each individual contract says. And typically, if you're freelancing, you don't have a right to sick pay. You don't have a right to sick leave. You certainly wouldn't have statutory sick pay as a rule. So it really does depend on how it's being managed, what the contract says, but also whether you can make yourself available. We could also face the fact that people in the gig economy, for example, Uber drivers, may refuse to attend for work because they're worried about what germs might come into their cars. So it's an issue on both sides, but the starting point is if you're not able to work, you probably might not get paid.
Good to talk to you, Kevin. Thank you very much indeed for those insights. Kevin Poulter there, an employment lawyer with the firm Freeths. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.